Whenever people think about a man who's successful, about a man who's a real man, about a man who they admire, almost always they think about a decisive man. I don't like generally to define manliness through women, through what women like, but a lot of guys do. And they're like, yeah, I want to be a decisive man. Like the woman's like, lead me, please, make decisions for me. And I mean, that is kind of how it works. I'm not saying that's not how women work. I'm saying, like, manhood should be defined through things other than women. But that's besides the point. Being decisive is a very big aspiration, especially in the world we're currently in, where there's so many different things you can watch online, so many different things you can do, so many different courses to take. It feels like there's a constant bombardment of possible decisions coming at you from every angle. And this can leave most guys feeling paralyzed. There's so many different decisions that you can make that it feels impossible to make any of them. While I did mention women earlier, there are numerous advantages to becoming more decisive besides just getting more women. Often the men who are the most successful in life aren't always the most disciplined or the smartest or the ones with the most money or the strongest ones. Those things definitely help, but often it's the men who are the most decisive. The earlier you decide what you're going to do, the more time you have to actually do it. The more time you have to actually dedicate toward that goal, and the less likely you are to doubt that goal and go back on it. One of the first things that leads a lot of guys to have a lot of difficulty making decisions is anxiety around, like, if I make the wrong decision, then I might be trapped in a situation that I don't want to be in. Sometimes this comes from a place of reality, sometimes it doesn't. So the first tip that I would give, it may sound kind of odd to sort of get over decision anxiety by thinking of the worst case scenario. But by the worst case scenario, I don't mean the worst possible case scenario. I mean the worst likely case scenario. Let's say this goes as poorly as it is ever really likely to go. What is likely to happen to me, and how is this likely going to affect my life over a long term? For example, a lot of guys get caught up in what's going to happen in the short term. If I accept this offer to do this public speaking thing, do this presentation in front of the class, whatever, then I might fail and I might be embarrassed. 10 years from now, nobody's going to care that you were embarrassed in high school. So when weighing out the pros and cons of a decision, weigh out what are the cons going to be, not in terms of how I feel like, okay, that day, maybe my whole week at school even is ruined. Am I going to be harmed seriously long term by any of these decisions? And sometimes you'll find the answer is yes. And in those situations where, like, this is a serious long-term decision that can really affect your life, then it's kind of worth, in a way, maybe not putting anxiety into it, but putting a bit more worry, a bit more care into it. But often you'll find that the answer is that none of the decisions are really going to hurt you. And even the decisions that can hurt you, ask yourself, is this negative effect really going to destroy me? Let's say you're about to invest thousands of dollars. Ask yourself, what happens if I lose these thousands of dollars? Even take the worst possible case scenario. What happens to me then? Often you'll find it's something you'll survive, and it's something that come years' time, you'll look back on and you'll realize the lessons that it taught you. And you often will not regret it, even if in the moment it was a bad decision. And this leads into the next point, which is that a lot of the difficulty that guys have with making decisions and a lot of the anxiety that comes up around it comes from the fact that they have two decisions that both seem similar in how good they are. And when it comes to very similar decisions, one of the most effective tactics to use, and something that I use anytime I make a decision at any point in my life is that I do a fallback decision. I go with my gut. I go with what seems kind of the best-ish, even by a little bit at that moment, and I don't question that feeling. I just decide, if I haven't decided by this certain date, then I'm going with this option. No matter what, I'm not thinking more after that, and I'm not thinking really hard leading up to that deadline. If that deadline hits and I haven't yet made a decision, then I'm just going to pick that one. How do you decide which decision to turn into your fallback decision? Think, in 10 years, what would I regret the most having not picked? What would I regret having not tried, or potentially having tried and lost a lot on the most? And if neither is really something you would regret, if both are good decisions, it's just the question of which is the better one, and you can't really decide which is the better one, then just pick any. I've met so many people who get all in a tizzy and they have tons of anxiety and they lose their minds over a decision between two things that are different, but they're extremely similar in how good they are. Neither is really that much riskier than the other. Neither is really that much better or worse than the other in its rewards, but they just lose their minds over the decision. In this situation, I say just pick anything. Because at that point, the little bit of betterness of goodness in the decision that you might lose picking the second best decision is already being eaten up by the time that you could be spending working toward that path, but just worrying about it. Because if you had that time to dedicate to the second best decision, it would be better than if you had less time because the time was eaten up by worrying over it and still made the best decision. After you set a fallback decision, do continue to look into what the best options are. Do continue to learn as much about each option as you can without delving so deeply into it that at that point, you're just rehashing the same information and you're not really learning anything. You're just assuaging your anxiety by making yourself feel as if I'm learning about the options and maybe this will help me make my decision, when you're really just trying to escape the decision anxiety. But once the deadline hits, do not let that anxiety extend past the point at which you make the decision. Because at that point, it will make it into a bad decision. If you keep worrying about it, it will make it the worst decision. Because now you don't have enough time to dedicate to the decision to make it into a good decision. Once you've decided, you're locked in, and now at this point, there are no other options. There's nothing else to pick. So reminiscing about what else you could have picked doesn't matter, because now you're trapped, and the only thing that there's left to do is simply do the best thing that you can. Even if you put yourself in a bad situation, even if you pick a really, really bad decision, and that's where you're stuck now, then reminiscing, it doesn't matter. You're trapped in this decision now. That's simply how it is. And work as you would in any other. If you were kidnapped, you wouldn't think about, if I hadn't walked on this road. That's just where you are, and you can't change it. And extending the worry past the decision date, it will ruin whatever decision you made, whether it's a good decision or a bad decision. So think about it as if it is something that is inevitable now. Something that was decided outside of your control. There are no decisions. This is simply how things now are. And I'm not going to let myself think about what things could have been like. But what about for decisions that aren't similar? That aren't basically, any is a good decision, I'm just quibbling because I want to feel like I've made the best decision? What about decisions that are big, important, risky, but potentially big payoff decisions? The decisions that could actually change somebody's life. I'd recommend first, set your default decision, set your fallback decision as the one that has the least change and the least risk. Because this will eliminate the vast majority of decision anxiety. Because if you don't, you always have that fallback of, if I don't decide by this certain date, things will stay the same. And a lot of people have fear of missing out. They have FOMO, but I might miss out on this really big opportunity. And if they find out that they miss out on a really big opportunity, they're going to be sitting there and be like, they'll feel as if they went back because they didn't get that really big opportunity. Except that staying where you are is not losing anything. A lot of people, they have a ton of anxiety around missing out on a big opportunity. If you miss out on a big opportunity, what has happened to you that warrants you feeling really bad? Probably nothing. Nothing serious has happened for the worse to you. Something better didn't happen. You also didn't win the lottery and get $1 million. So simply don't allow yourself to feel bad or to feel afraid of missing out on a certain opportunity unless missing out on that opportunity actually would lead to your situation becoming a bad situation. And in most cases, just staying as you are probably isn't going to be that bad of a situation. Now, often when people make decisions such as picking up a new hobby or something like that, or as I decided when making these channels, I decided the other way that I'm going to tell you about. But a lot of people, when they make their decisions, they say, well, if I don't like it, I can just stop. If it doesn't work out for me, then I can just stop. And this is a true thing about decisions. And it's a good thing about decisions. It can help. Thinking like this does have its merits. But this often leads to people stopping and starting things a lot. So, and this leads to a lot of wasted time. Because, you start a hobby, you do it for like 6 months, and then you stop. And doing a hobby for 6 months doesn't help you with anything. It doesn't really improve you. It doesn't create any marketable skill. If you just so I've met plenty of people, they try on hobbies, they take them off, they do this thing, they do that, they go through all these eras, they change personalities, but it doesn't really amount to anything because nothing has been stuck to. So when you make any decision that involves like scheduled daily actions such as a hobby, a plan, a side hustle, whatever it could be, when you are making the decision, think about it as if you were going to keep on doing that thing for the rest of your life. Plan out both ways. I don't make this decision, I do make this decision. What does the rest of my life look like? On the assumption that you're going to continue with it for the rest of your life. And then, once you've started thinking about it that way, set a certain minimum length of time. I'm going to do this for at least this long, or until I reach at least this level. Often that level should be where it's at least a little useful so that I can apply at least a little bit of this to conversations that I have with people and to things I do in real life until I get at least something usable in my life out of it so that I'm not putting my time into nothing. But I'm doing it at least this long. This, first of all, makes it so you don't give up super early before you start seeing returns, before you realize what there really lies for you there. You do it long enough that it actually does provide something useful to you, and it makes you take the decisions you make seriously. Because then, even if you're unhappy 3 months in, you said, nope, I'm doing this for 6 months. I'm doing this for a year. And then for the next 9 months, you do a thing that you don't want to do, that you don't like doing, and that may kind of sound like a waste of time, and that's why I do recommend doing it as efficiently as possible, to waste as little time as possible, but it will, over the course of your life, lead to a lot less wasted time, because you will make less decisions in the future, not taking them seriously, trying them for a few months, and then stopping, because now the decisions you make have weight, which can in a way also create a little bit of decision anxiety, which is why I say don't think about adding habits, adding hobbies, adding things to your life unless you really see that it's going to provide something to you, because otherwise you'll create a lot of wasted time and a lot of stress. Don't feel like you need to constantly be adding new things and be changing things to be improving your life. Because there's plenty of people who change up things about their life because they're like, well, I've been trying for a few months and I'm still not a millionaire, so that must mean something has to change. Set up a system. The whole point of adding habits, adding hobbies, is in order to set up a system that will lead over a very long period of time, over the course of your whole life, to better outcomes. Just because it hasn't worked yet, to the extent that you want it to, doesn't mean that it hasn't worked at all, and doesn't mean that it won't work in the future. So don't feel like you always need to change.